Week 1 is in the books. You had a win or a loss. You dealt with some injuries, and now it's time to figure out who to start for Week 2. You probably know who your studs are. They're probably the same as the studs you thought you drafted. Sometimes it's a little different. Now it's time to get into the nitty-gritty. Time to figure out who those best start-sits are for the second week of the NFL season. What's up, guys? My name is Matt Savoca from the Stochastic Fantasy Football channel, and today I'm bringing you 3 running backs, 3 wide receivers, 3 tight ends, and 3 quarterbacks. 2 of them I'm definitely starting with confidence. 1 of them I'm sitting until further notice right now. Let's get into the action for Week 2. We start at running back, and I've got to say, I'm impressed with Leonard Fournette of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So much for Fat Lenny. He looked incredibly strong against a Dallas defense that was top 12 in Football Outsiders rush DVOA a year ago. He played 76% of the snaps for the Buccaneers, had 23 opportunities, 5.9 yards per opportunity, caught both of his targets, and was running back 13 in PFF's expected fantasy points metric. He performed just above expectations as well. And New Orleans, his opponent this week, struggled mightily against Atlanta's rush game. That's something that's rare for them. New Orleans is usually one of the top rush defenses in the NFL. They were number 1 in Football Outsiders DVOA last year. But Fournette, who looked good, especially in mop-up duties at the end of that Dallas game where Dallas didn't push Tampa Bay at all, I think you can start him with confidence. Rachaad White was okay, but not must play fine. This is Leonard Fournette's backfield to lose, and I think the Tampa Bay offense shows up even more in Week 2 than they did Week 1. The next running back I want to highlight is Melvin Gordon of the Denver Broncos. All the hype was going to Javonte Williams, who was running back 4 in expected fantasy points. I mean, I get it. He got a lot of use in the receiving game, and that helped his opportunity value, but a ton of that was situational. Javonte was the 2-minute drill back in both the end of the first half and the end of the game. Gordon saw a nearly equal snap share, more rush attempts, more goal line attempts, and ranked 11th in PFF's expected fantasy points metric himself. That's a pretty good game against Seattle, where Denver's offense really didn't show up for most of the game. It would have been a better day if he hadn't fumbled at the goal line, but it just tells you the opportunity value is there to be an every week starter, and now he's playing the Houston Texans. The Houston defense was league average last week, but last year and the year before that, they were at the very, very bottom of the league. They were 30th in schedule-adjusted fantasy points allowed to opposing offenses last year, the 3rd easiest defense to play against last year. I think this is a get-right game for the Denver offense as a whole. I think Melvin Gordon's playing time and snap share and opportunity share is clearly starter value, and if they score plenty of points, so too will Melvin Gordon. And this pains me to say, but I am sitting Travis Etienne against the Indianapolis Colts in Week 2. 51% snap share is fine, I guess, but only 8 total opportunities for Etienne. You can't start a running back who's getting less than 10 opportunities within the Jacksonville Jaguars offense. They're just not slated to score enough points overall. There's just so little upside, so little ceiling. The 4 targets are nice, I suppose, but he only caught half of them, only averaged 4.5 yards per target, and while Etienne was a fine prospect, he's a little bit miscast as a pass-catching back. If I knew that James Robinson was fully healthy, playing at the 2020 and 2021 level that he's capable of, and he certainly looked the part last week, I would say James Robinson is a better all-around running back right now. And despite an identical snap share, James Robinson completely outperformed Travis Etienne in both opportunity and efficiency last year. While Indianapolis isn't a super scary defense by any stretch, I'm sitting Etienne until further notice. We move over to the wide receiver position with a first-year player I am suddenly really excited about. We're going to play Garrett Wilson versus Cleveland, guys. On the surface, there was nothing spectacular about Garrett Wilson's stat line. 49% snap share is okay, but the 8 targets on a 49% snap share? That means the quarterback wants to get you the ball every single time you're in the game. On a limited route tree, Garrett Wilson was the wide receiver 12 in PFF's expected fantasy points metric in Week 1. Tons and tons of air yards are coming for Garrett Wilson, especially while Joe Flacco is the starter. I mean, Flacco is airing it out. He had 300 passing yards in a loss to Baltimore Week 1. He's in full DGAF mode, and Cleveland, their opponent this week, was 26th in yards per attempt last week, struggled against Baker Mayfield, 28th in points allowed per play. Now, there's some natural variance with the opportunity and efficiency with rookies, but this is really, really promising for the Jets rookie wide receiver, smashing the over on the 40.5 game total on this Jets-Cleveland game, and I think Garrett is going to be a beneficiary of that increased scoring. I think he sees 8 targets once again, and I'm starting him with confidence against the Browns. The next wide receiver we're starting in week 2, it's Julio Jones of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. They're playing the New Orleans Saints, not the easiest matchup, but not the hardest one either if week 1 is any indication. Some will see a mere 52% snap share and say it's so-so, especially with just 5 targets, but Julio is about to be utilized a ton in this Tampa Bay offense. 13.8 yards per target, what he averaged in week 1. That's like old school Julio Jones, excellent. Used in the rushing game as well, tied with Mike Evans in terms of route participation rate, inside the top 40 in expected fantasy points. And of course, Godwin's dealing with that hamstring injury. Russell Gage is still dealing with a hamstring injury, and players like Cameron Brate and Cade Otton are not suddenly taking a huge target share within this offense. Speaking of target share, Mike Evans was never a player that commanded a massive target share either. He usually gets there on efficiency, touchdown upside, but he's about a 7 targets per game player. More pass heavy. Tampa Bay Buccaneers are going to be helpful for Julio Jones going forward here. I think he could easily start to see 7 targets per game, especially with Godwin and Gage banged up. New Orleans didn't just get gashed on the ground as well. They were 21st in points allowed per play in week 1 and 16th in yards per pass attempt. Tom Brady is going to eat them alive if that's the case, and Julio Jones will score plenty of fantasy points. And guys, I am sitting Darnell Mooney, wide receiver for the Chicago Bears. He saw a 90% snap share as we would expect, but just 3 targets, that is not going to get it done. The Bears offense was suddenly making Dante Pettis and Equanimeous St. Brown a thing, and I realized it was a muddy, rainy game, a very weird game, one where we could almost say you could throw away the stats, but I'm not going to here. Wide receiver 72 in expected fantasy points. Wow, that's scary low for a player like Mooney, who was always going to be an opportunity play, not efficiency or touchdown play because he's playing for the Bears. This week, they're 10-point underdogs against the rival Green Bay Packers on the road. Mooney's going to be seeing plenty of Jair Alexander, the star cornerback for the Green Bay Packers. And while Justin Jefferson had a huge game last week, this is a very different and much less competent Chicago Bears offense. I'm going to sit him this week and wait for the stretch of games afterwards. He plays Houston, the Giants, Minnesota, and Washington after this Green Bay game. Maybe we can start him after week 2. Hey guys, I just want to tell you about an awesome offer from our friends over at Underdog Fantasy. Are your best ball teams from the summer already cooked? Head over to Underdog Fantasy and you can get in the action for the week 6 through 17 best ball tournament, the Resurrection Tournament as they're calling it. The entry fee is just $10 with $500K up top, and we got a great promo code for you. Promo code STOCHASTIC, STOKASTIC, can get you a first match deposit bonus up to $100 so you can get in on the action for those tournaments and all the other sports and games they've got over on Underdog Fantasy. Truly a great time to get in over there on Underdog. That's promo code STOCHASTIC. At the tight end position, of course, guys, this is a start your studs situation. Kyle Pitts, you're still starting. If George Kittle is back in the lineup, you're still starting him. But there are some mid-tier players we need to highlight here because their opportunities and opportunity value was way higher than we expected it to be. We start with Hayden Hurst of the Cincinnati Bengals playing the Dallas Cowboys, who are, of course, going to be without Dak Prescott on the offensive side of the ball. So that means Cincinnati should be able to control this game from start to finish. And if that's the case, Hurst will play a ton. He had a 75% snap share in week 1, 8 targets. That was second highest among all tight ends, and his 12.1 expected fantasy points, that was tight end 4, according to PFF. We got T. Higgins in the concussion protocol, banged up. Hopefully he can go for week 2, but if not, then the opportunity floor is incredibly high in this winnable game against the Dallas Cowboys. Dallas was 21st in yards allowed per pass attempt and 11th in points allowed per play, but that was artificially high because Tampa Bay wasn't putting their foot on the gas because they weren't challenged at all. In 2021, this Dallas defense was 15th in Football Outsiders DVOA. Not scary, Burrow's going to throw a ton, and suddenly we now know that Hurst is going to play a ton. If this receiving core is banged up, expect Hayden Hurst to step in easily to that receiver 3 or even 2 role and have an 8-target floor. I'm starting him against Dallas. Another player I'm slotting into my starting lineup is Tyler Higbee of the Los Angeles Rams, playing the Atlanta Falcons this week. But look at those week 1 stat lines. 11 targets, led all tight ends last week, so 5 catches for 39 yards. That's actually a huge underperformance. He had a couple really bad drops, which I think he can correct going forward. He was still tight end 7 in expected fantasy points according to PFF and scored 4.1 fantasy points above expectation despite those drops. He was tight end 11 in that opportunity value metric according to PFF last year. And while there is some variance in the opportunity with the Los Angeles Rams outside of Cooper Kupp, A-Rob is obviously going to be more involved. If Higbee is going to see close to 10 targets on the Rams offense, he is a must-start player every single week, regardless of his positional status. The fact that he's a tight end is just an added bonus. This is turning into a must-start role because of his value within a great offense. 5 for 39 is not going to happen again. We're starting Tyler Higbee. And guys, if you have Hunter Henry and you're considering starting him, I'd say no. Against Pittsburgh this week, there's just too many question marks. Mac Jones is dealing with back spasms, and while it looks like he may be able to go, he's certainly not 100%. Speaking of not 100%, Hunter Henry played on only 77% of the team's snaps, saw just 3 targets, caught 2 of them for just 20 yards, and the Pittsburgh defense is looking much sharper than that Pittsburgh offense, picking off Joe Burrow multiple times, and of course that key block at the end of regulation that helped them eventually win the game. Pittsburgh was top 10 in yards allowed per pass attempt and 7th in points allowed per play, so the stats back that up from week 1, and they were 6th best in adjusted fantasy points allowed to the tight end position last year. They're particularly stingy against tight ends. Mac Jones is banged up, as we said. There's too many mouths to feed in the New England offense, in my opinion, so I am sitting Hunter Henry against the Pittsburgh Steelers. I'll wait till week 3. And finally, we move to the quarterback position. Let's say you lost Dak Prescott and you're looking for a mid-tier option. I'm first looking to Matt Ryan, playing the Jacksonville Jaguars. I know he performed under expectations in week 1, but he still threw 50 times in that overtime matchup against the Texans. Finished with 352 passing yards, 24 expected fantasy points, which was QB 7 on the week, though he performed well below expectation. He's got another strong matchup this week in week 2. The Jacksonville Jaguars just made Washington look like a competent offense. They start the year 17th in Football Outsiders DVOA and 25th in points allowed per play. I'd like to see players like Pittman and Hines and Doolin and Pierce step up even more in the passing game for Matt Ryan, but if that opportunity value is going to be this high, even without any kind of rushing upside, Matt Ryan is a pretty strong QB1 option this week. And if Matt Ryan's not available, I'd consider Carson Wentz against the Detroit Lions. Detroit was really bad defensively against the Eagles in week 1. They were 4th worst in yards per carry, but also 6th worst in the NFL in yards allowed per pass attempt and bottom 5 in points allowed per play. They look like a bad defense once again, and they're 29th in Football Outsiders DVOA to start the year. Didn't go great against Philadelphia, and I don't think it's going to go great against Washington either. Wentz was QB 10 in expected fantasy points and actually scored 6.2 fantasy points above expectation with those 4 touchdown passes. 313 yards as well. Part of that, of course, is the Jacksonville defense, but I don't think Detroit's defense is looking much better at all. Wentz was utilized on scrambles and designed rushes that give him a sneaky high floor as well. And Detroit was 26th in schedule adjusted fantasy points allowed to the quarterback position last year. A high floor, decently high ceiling option. Carson Wentz is a really solid low-end QB1 this week. And finally, I'm sitting Ryan Tannehill if I can possibly swing it. This game against Buffalo could be really tough. They were 2nd best, Buffalo was, defensively against the quarterback last year. They were number 1 in Football Outsiders DVOA stat as a defense. Last week, they held Stafford really in check, -5 fantasy points below expectation for Matt Stafford in week 1 against this Buffalo defense. And Tannehill was quarterback 20 in expected fantasy points. He actually performed above expectations. That's not really what I saw on the field. I saw an underperforming quarterback. The opportunity value is less than players like Wentz and Ryan and players like Flacco, Goff, and even Jacoby Brissett had more expected fantasy points in week 1. limited in terms of rushing and scrambles as well. This is a tough matchup, an offense that looks to be in flux at best, and I think they might get blown out. I am not starting Ryan Tannehill in week 2. And there you have it, guys. My must start and sit players at the quarterback, running back, wide receiver, and tight end positions for week 2 of the 2022 NFL season. Obviously, you're starting your studs, but this should help you navigate some of the tougher decisions and matchup choices in week 2. We can always help you out over here on the Stokastic Fantasy Football channel, so make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, hit that notification bell so that you know when we're going live, and if you want, you can follow me, Matt Savoca, on Twitter @Draftaholic.